The package arrived at Christo Brand's home on a cold morning in 1984. Inside was a small wooden toy car, handcrafted with meticulous care. The tag read, "For Riaan, happy 5th birthday." It was signed simply, Nelson. Christo Brand stared at it in disbelief. He was a prison guard at Pollsmoor Prison. Nelson Mandela was his prisoner, a man the apartheid government called the most dangerous terrorist in South Africa. Brand had never told Mandela about his son. He had never mentioned Riaan's name. He had never shared a single personal detail about his life outside those prison walls. But somehow, Mandela knew. And what that wooden toy represented didn't just change a prison guard's perspective. It redefined what it meant to see someone's humanity, even when the system demanded you deny it. This is the true story of how Nelson Mandela transformed his jailer with a gift carved in a prison cell. It was 1978. South Africa was in the grip of apartheid, a brutal system of racial segregation enforced by law. Nelson Mandela had been imprisoned for 16 years, convicted of sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. The world called him a freedom fighter. The South African government called him a terrorist. Mandela was 60 years old. He had been transferred from Robben Island to Pollsmoor Prison in Cape Town, a maximum security facility where the government hoped to isolate him further from the growing anti-apartheid movement outside. The apartheid regime needed men to guard Mandela, men who would follow orders, enforce rules, maintain the system. Christo Brand was one of those men. He was 19 years old, white Afrikaner, fresh out of training. He had grown up in a country that taught him black people were inferior, that Mandela was the enemy, that showing compassion was weakness. Brand's job was simple: keep Mandela locked up. Don't talk to him beyond necessity. Don't see him as human. Just guard him. What Brand didn't know was that Mandela had a different plan. Nelson Mandela sat in his cell on the 3rd floor of Pollsmoor Prison. At 60 years old, his hair was graying, his body showing the wear of nearly 2 decades behind bars. But his eyes held something the prison walls couldn't touch: dignity, clarity, purpose. He had spent his days studying law, reading, writing, but he also did something the guards found strange. He paid attention to them. He asked about their lives. He remembered details. He treated them not as enemies, but as human beings caught in the same broken system. Mandela believed in Ubuntu, a Joseph philosophy that meant, I am because we are. Your humanity is my humanity. We are bound together. Christo Brand stood just under 6 feet tall, lean and wiry, with the nervous energy of a teenager trying to prove he belonged among men. He wore the standard-issue khaki prison uniform, polished boots, keys jangling at his belt. His blonde hair was cut military short. His hands were always in motion, checking locks, adjusting his belt, fidgeting. His name was Christo Brand. He was 19 years old when he was assigned to Mandela's section in 1978. He came from a conservative Afrikaner family. His father had fought for the National Party. Brand had been taught his entire life that apartheid was necessary, that black South Africans were dangerous, that Mandela was a terrorist who wanted to destroy everything Brand's people had built. But on his first day, when he opened Mandela's cell door, something unexpected happened. Mandela stood, extended his hand, and said, "Good morning. My name is Nelson. What is yours?" No prisoner had ever done that. No black man had ever treated Brand as an equal. Brand didn't shake his hand that first day. He'd been trained not to. But the moment stayed with him. Over the months, Brand watched Mandela. He saw how Mandela treated other prisoners with respect, how he studied by candlelight late into the night, how he exercised every morning without fail, how he never complained, never begged, never broke. And slowly, against every rule he'd been taught, Brand began to wonder, what if everything he'd been told about this man was wrong? It started small. Brand would deliver Mandela's meals. Mandela would say, "Thank you, Christo." He always used Brand's first name. It was a small thing, but it was humanizing. One day, Mandela asked, "Christo, do you have family?" Brand hesitated. He wasn't supposed to share personal information, but something in Mandela's tone, genuine curiosity, no manipulation, made him answer, "Yes, sir, I'm married." Mandela smiled. "That's wonderful. What is her name?" "Glenda." "A beautiful name," Mandela said. "You're a fortunate man." The conversation was brief, but it planted a seed. Weeks later, Brand mentioned that his wife was pregnant. He didn't mean to. It slipped out during a routine check. Mandela's face lit up. "A child? Christo, that's a blessing. When is the baby due?" "April," Brand said quietly. "You must be excited." Brand nodded. He was, but he was also terrified. He was 20 years old, barely making enough money to support himself, let alone a family. The pressure was crushing. Mandela seemed to sense this. "You'll be a good father," he said simply. "I can tell." Brand didn't know what to say. Here was a man who had been separated from his own children for decades, offering comfort to the son of his oppressors. When Brand's son Riaan was born in 1979, Brand didn't tell Mandela immediately. But Mandela noticed the change, the exhaustion, the distraction, the new photos Brand carried in his wallet. "Your child has arrived," Mandela said one morning. It wasn't a question. Brand looked up surprised. "How did you—" "You have the look of a new father," Mandela said, smiling. "Tired, but happy. Congratulations, Christo. What's his name?" "Riaan. A strong name. He will grow up to make you proud." The kindness in Mandela's voice broke something in Brand. This wasn't supposed to happen. Mandela was supposed to be the enemy. But the enemy was wishing him well. The terrorist was celebrating his son's birth. Brand walked away confused, shaken, and beginning to see cracks in everything he'd been taught. It was April 1984, Riaan's 5th birthday. Brand had been guarding Mandela for 6 years now. The relationship had evolved in ways Brand couldn't fully explain. He respected Mandela. He looked forward to their brief conversations. He found himself defending Mandela when other guards spoke cruelly about him. But he still didn't expect what happened next. A package arrived at Brand's home. His wife Glenda called him at work. "There's something here for Riaan," she said, confused. "From the prison?" Brand's stomach dropped. Had he violated protocol? Was he in trouble? He went home that evening and opened the package. Inside was a small wooden toy car, painted in bright colors, with wheels that actually turned. It was handmade, crafted with extraordinary care. Every detail was perfect. The windows, the doors, even tiny carved headlights. The tag said, "For Riaan, happy 5th birthday. May you always move forward. Nelson." Brand stood in his living room, holding the toy, and his hands began to shake. The next morning, Brand arrived at work early. He waited until the corridor was empty, then opened Mandela's cell. Mandela looked up from his reading. "Good morning, Christo." Brand held up the toy car. His voice cracked. "You made this?" "I did," Mandela said calmly. "Do you think Riaan will like it?" "How did you—" Brand stopped. How did you even know about his birthday? Mandela set down his book. You mentioned it once, 2 years ago. You said April was a special month because your wife and your son both have birthdays then. Brand's eyes filled with tears. He had mentioned it. Once. In passing. 2 years ago. And Mandela had remembered. I don't understand, Brand said. I'm your jailer. I keep you locked in here. Why would you— Christo, Mandela interrupted gently. You didn't create this system. You were born into it, just as I was. You wear that uniform because you're trying to feed your family. I understand that. Brand shook his head, but I'm part of it. Every day I lock you in here, I'm choosing their side. No, Mandela said firmly. Every day, you treat me with basic human dignity. You're choosing your own side. You're choosing to see me as a person. That matters more than you know. Mandela stood and walked to the bars. Christo, you have a son now. What do you want him to grow up believing? That some people are worth less than others because of their skin? Or that every person carries infinite worth? Brand couldn't speak. I made that toy for Riaan, Mandela continued, because I want him to grow up in a different South Africa than the one we have now. I want him to inherit a country where his father doesn't have to guard me, where I don't have to be guarded. And that country begins with small acts of humanity, like a toy car, like a conversation, like seeing each other. Brand wiped his eyes. I don't know if I can change anything. You already have, Mandela said quietly. You've changed yourself. That's where all change begins. Brand returned home that night and sat with his wife. He told her everything, about the conversations, about the gift, about what Mandela had said. Glenda listened, then asked the question that would define the rest of their lives. What are you going to do? Brand didn't have an answer yet, but something had shifted. He couldn't unsee what Mandela had shown him, that the man in that cell was more human, more dignified, more compassionate than the system that imprisoned him. Over the following weeks, Brand's perspective continued to transform. He began questioning orders. He started treating all prisoners with more respect. He found small ways to make Mandela's conditions more bearable. An extra book here, a longer exercise period there. Nothing that would get him fired, but everything that acknowledged Mandela's humanity. Other guards noticed. Some mocked him. Has Mandela turned you? They'd ask. Brand would just shrug. But inside, he knew the answer was yes. Mandela had turned him. Not through force or manipulation, but through simple, persistent humanity. The toy car sat on a shelf in Riaan's room. Brand's son played with it constantly, unaware that it had been made by the most famous prisoner in the world. But Brand knew, and every time he saw it, he was reminded of what Mandela had taught him. Humanity transcends walls. In 1990, Mandela was released. Brand was there at the gate. When Mandela walked out, he stopped, turned, and found Brand in the crowd of guards. He walked over and embraced him. Thank you, Christo, Mandela said, for being a good man in a bad system. Brand couldn't speak. He just held on. In the years that followed, Brand left the prison service. He couldn't continue in a system he no longer believed in. He became a speaker, an advocate for reconciliation. He told his story publicly, how a prisoner had taught his jailer about freedom. Brand remained connected to Mandela for the rest of Mandela's life. He attended Mandela's presidential inauguration. He visited him in his later years. They became, against all odds, friends. In 2014, Brand published a book, Mandela, My Prisoner, My Friend. In it he wrote, Nelson Mandela didn't just change South Africa. He changed me. He taught me that our humanity isn't defined by the system we're born into, but by how we choose to see each other within that system. The wooden toy car still sits in Brand's home today. His son Riaan, now grown, keeps it as a reminder, not of apartheid, not of prison, but of the moment his father's jailer learned what Ubuntu truly meant. I am because we are. Brand's transformation became part of the larger story Mandela was building, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the vision of a rainbow nation. If a prison guard could change, anyone could. If a prisoner could forgive his jailer, anything was possible. This story isn't just about a toy car. It's about the radical choice to see someone's humanity when the entire system tells you not to. Mandela understood something profound. You can't change systems by becoming like them. You change systems by refusing to let them change you. Ubuntu, I am because we are, means that our humanity is interconnected. When Mandela made that gift for Riaan, he wasn't just being kind. He was declaring that even in prison, even under apartheid, even surrounded by people enforcing his captivity, he would choose to see their humanity. Because in seeing theirs, he preserved his own. Who in your life have you written off as the enemy? Who have you stopped seeing as fully human because of their politics, their beliefs, their role in a system you hate? What would it take for you to see them differently? Not to excuse harm, not to ignore injustice, but to recognize the person underneath the position. Mandela spent 27 years in prison, surrounded by people who were complicit in his oppression. He could have chosen hatred. He could have chosen revenge. Instead, he chose to carve a toy car for a 5-year-old boy whose father locked him in a cell every night. That choice, to extend humanity even to those who deny yours, is the most powerful act of resistance there is. Because systems of oppression depend on dehumanization, they require you to stop seeing each other as people. When you refuse, when you insist on humanity anyway, you undermine the entire foundation of injustice. If this story moved you, share it. Because somewhere, someone needs to remember that change doesn't start with grand gestures or political power. It starts with a conversation, a toy car, a moment of recognition. As Mandela said, no one is born hating another person. People must learn to hate, and if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. Christo Brand was taught to see Mandela as less than human. Mandela taught him differently, not with lectures, but with a handmade gift for a child he'd never met. That's the power of Ubuntu. That's the revolution of love over hate. And that wooden toy car, sitting on a shelf in South Africa today, is proof that the smallest acts of humanity can transform everything. Your move. Will you build walls or bridges? Will you see enemies or fellow humans? The choice, like always, is yours.